Welcome to Civics in a Year, the podcast that makes civic literacy fast, accessible, and surprisingly engaging. In just 10 minutes an episode, we'll tackle one of 250 essential questions about American democracy, how it works, why it matters, and what it means for you. Whether you're a student, a teacher, or just someone who wants to better understand your country and your rights, you're in the right place. Civics in a Year is powered by the Civic Literacy Curriculum from the Center for American Civics and is produced in partnership with the School of Civic and Economic Thought and Leadership at Arizona State University. Welcome back to Civics in a Year. We are talking today again about Alexis de Tocqueville, but we're talking about Alexis de Tocqueville on something called reflective patriotism. And it's one of my favorite kind of words to talk about, reflective patriotism. And with us, we have Dr. Paul Carrese. So Dr. Carrese, in Democracy in America, Tocqueville writes that Americans have a unique kind of public spiritedness or patriotism. And he states that we have something called reflective patriotism. What does he mean by this, and why is that important?
Yes, thank you very much, Liz. But immediately, let me just define this complicated phrase. The French term could be translated as considered patriotism or reflective patriotism. Another way is thinking it's a rational patriotism. So one issue we have with this in the 21st century is we think of patriotism as mostly emotion. Like we just happen to be recording this after the Winter Olympics of 2026.
Yes.
And some Americans won some gold medals, this wonderful women's figure skater, the men's hockey team, some of this, right? And they're draped
The
in
women's
the American
hockey team.
Excuse me, I apologize. I knew I was going to forget, right? The women's hockey team, right? So, and they're draped in the American flag, and it's emotional, right?
Yes.
And Tocqueville says that's what patriotism means everywhere in the world in the 1830s. Patriotism means love of your country. It's a sentiment. And the Americans have that. They have an emotional commitment to and sentiment about America. America's a good thing. They're proud of it. He mentions, as a foreigner, if you say anything critical about America and you're a foreigner, boy, do the Americans let you hear it. They do not like these foreigners telling them there's some problem, right? So it's this kind of pride. So yes, the Americans have that, which every other people have. You know, you go to France or Russia or any country in the world, and you'll have this kind of emotional view. But the Americans have this rational element as well, he says, that he finds nowhere else in the world. The Americans have a reflective patriotism, a considered patriotism. And what is that element to it? The Americans have a government based on ideas. And the principle of it, consent of the governed, is that government is supposed to be good for me, for you, for us. And so there's always this rational argument. Is the government doing the good thing or the right thing? Is it working for me as an individual, for my family, for my friends, for my community, for everything? And an argument comes out of that. So the Americans have this, I think you could also say, when he doesn't use this term literally, we have a discursive or argumentative kind of patriotism. And so why is this important? Well, one immediate issue I want to bring up, of course you know about it, Liz, is that there's a national study published in 2021 called Educating for American Democracy. It was an attempt to bring scholars and educators from left to center to right, I'll say, different philosophical views about America and American citizenship education, history education. And in Educating for American Democracy, I happen to be one of the 7 lead co-authors of it. We decided to use this term from Tocqueville, and we cite Tocqueville, reflective patriotism. And we open the report, Educating for American Democracy, and we close it by invoking this idea because we were writing, it's still true 5 years later, we were writing at a time of polarization and angry polarization and division about America, but also facing the reality of kind of civic apathy. The report doesn't go into this. This is me editorializing, right? There are small, I would say, there's a small number of people who really care about American politics, and they are angry at each other. and they use even violent language toward each other. And our parties are very divided. Congress is very closely divided. Presidential elections are won on very narrow grounds, right? So that's a reality. But the other dimension of reality we often overlook is that there's a huge number of people in America who don't care. It's civic apathy. Partly they're checked out because politics is angry and so divisive, and this polarization that sounds like, craziness. I'm just going to mind my own business and avoid that kind of anger and divisiveness. But there's also a kind of selfishness about it. I've got a job to worry about, or I'm looking for a job, or I got problems in life. I've got to, somebody else is going to have to deal with this self-government thing. Okay. And we were trying to say in the Educating for American Democracy study, America will not survive. The United States of America won't survive unless we have patriotism of the right sort, so that everybody who's a citizen or an aspiring citizen really cares about America. And partly enough people to care about America so we can survive the angry polarization about American public policy, but enough people to care about America so that we could see ourselves as Americans generally first, before we get to any differences or disagreements, and see our whole constitutional order as everybody's. This is our common ground before we get to disagreements. So we opened and closed by saying we need this balanced kind of patriotism that Tocqueville talks about, a reflective patriotism. Yes, it's got the emotional part. America is a good thing, but it's got the reflective, considered, discursive part. But let's argue about it, right? America's a good thing, and let's argue about it. And we've always done that. Everything in America has come out of argument and disagreement. The Declaration of Independence comes out of that. The Constitution comes out of that. The Bill of Rights comes out of that. And it goes on and on and on. So this insight from Tocqueville is very helpful to us today. And I want to mention one other thing about it. Everybody who's listening to this podcast has this kind of reflective patriotism, I want to suggest to you. You may have never thought about it that way. You care enough about America to care about civic education, to care about citizenship education. You care enough about being a citizen to want to learn about America. So you've got this kind of the sentimental, emotional commitment part, but you've got it in this reflective way. And that America is about ideas, and it's about this complicated kind of self-government. And so we need to do some studying. And so I think for us, the Educating for American Democracy report, we realize there's a problem with civic education in K-12 schools, in higher education, which is, why should I care? What's the motivation? I've got other things that I need to study that will help me to get a job or help me to get ahead in life, deal with more immediate problems that I have. Why should I care about this citizenship education stuff, right? So the commitment to America as a good thing needs to be a part of civic education. And then Tocqueville, his genius is to say, well, the Americans have this distinct way of doing that, reflective or considered patriotism.
So Tocqueville's kind of focus on reflective patriotism fits within his general concerns in American democracy about citizen participation in self-government and sustaining a spirit of liberty.
Yes, and it's an interesting thing. When I started studying this, it occurred to me, it occurs as a phrase, reflective patriotism, or patriotism more narrowly, just as a single word, from the beginning of the book to the end of the book. It's there. And I just hadn't noted. I'd been reading Democracy in America for a long, long time, and I really hadn't noticed it's there so consistently. And it does reinforce, it's sort of a sub-element of this larger theme he has in Democracy in America, to keep alive the spirit of liberty, of participatory self-government as crucial to America. So he has different elements, and I argue, and actually this is coming out in a book which I use Reflective Patriotism in the subtitle of. It's coming out in May 2026, called Teaching America. It's about civic education. Teaching America, Reflective Patriotism in Schools, College, and Culture. And I talk about how he has different elements of a reflective patriotism. One of them is the founding religious culture of America. At the beginning of democracy in America is that, the Puritans bring a spirit of liberty blended with a spirit of religion. And this is a formative character and culture of America. And out of that arises this distinctive American blend of a rational and sentimental patriotism. You could say the religious part is the sentimental, emotional belief part, and the rational part is this is about liberty. So we're going to have argument and self-government and laws and complex ways of dealing with each other. And then he talks more explicitly about the blend of self-interest and the old world general kind of patriotism. The Americans care about America, and they do it in this kind of rational, self-interested way. Okay, I'm a citizen of America, and I'm getting involved in the town council, or I'm getting involved in helping with this public problem or holding this small office, a post office position, or dealing with roads in the town or dealing with schools in the town. I'm going to do that because it's going to be better for me and my family and my friends if I get involved participate in self-government, because the common good is really the best way to achieve my good, my own good. So he talks explicitly about that and says this is part of the reflective patriotism of the Americans, the considered rational part. And then later in the second volume, he explicitly uses the phrase of an enlightened or considered self-interest. The Americans think of their patriotism as in their self-interest. What's good for America is good for me, so I need to help out. I'm part of this whole collective enterprise, my town, my county, my state, to larger America. So it's this rational element. And then he also does talk about schooling. The Americans have a commitment to schooling for all people. Eventually, they have tax funds being used in the states to provide a broader civic education. Now, he doesn't get to women being educated in schools, and it's not as completely democratic as we would say today, but we have a more democratic, egalitarian conception of public schools and public education because of things that were happening in the 19th century and things Tocqueville was writing about this commitment to common schools. And Americans learn all the skills and ideas that they need to be citizens. So that's also part of his reflective patriotism, that communities and states are committed to education and schooling. So the putting this back in the larger picture, all of this is good. The Americans have this right blend of sort of the religious foundation, the kind of habits of the heart, the sentimental part with the self-interested rational part. But as we've talked about in other episodes, he is a little worried that the Americans are too focused on equality, the sort of democratic spirit of me and my family getting ahead in life. Very poor people are born in America and they're still coming from Europe, and they haven't had this kind of liberty and opportunity elsewhere, but they got to get ahead on their own. And so that can be very absorbing. And so he writes about this sort of pull of your own economic advancement and material equality pulling you away from being a citizen. And so reflective patriotism can help Americans to say, I'm interested in how my community, my little township, my city, my county, my state, how America is doing. So I'm going to take some time to serve. I'm going to take some time to keep up on the news. I'm going to take some time to make sure I'm registered to vote. I'm going to take some time to participate. And it's interesting, he worries as democracy in America goes on that the rational or self-interested part of patriotism might be too dominant. Americans are losing out on some of the emotional, sentimental parts. He's worried, especially when he talks about federalism and slavery, and could the Union hold together if there's he talks about the possibility of a war over slavery. Could the rational part not really work to hold together with the sentimental part for the Union as a whole, a reflective patriotism about America, the United States of America, as a whole. So he's eventually in Democracy in America talking about the need to shore up some of the sentimental belief, religious elements of a reflective patriotism.
It's so funny when you talk about like he was like, oh, a warm like I just feel like democracy in America was almost a crystal ball because he names a lot of things that end up happening in American history. So this seems to be kind of characteristic of Tocqueville and Democracy in America. He might praise some elements of American life, but he also offers these warnings about it. Again, this amazing crystal ball that he seemed to have. So, what are his worries about whether we can sustain our distinctive kind of reflective patriotism?
Yes, and the one concern you talked about in another episode, and I've talked about it with you, his concern about this civic apathy, this
Mhm.
individualism, that the temptations of technology and economic advancement and this call of democratic equality, right? I can do better in life than my parents and my parents' generation did, and you get so absorbed in that those sort of economic and private and maybe family dimensions of life that you say, but somebody else can worry about politics. Somebody can do the self-government thing for me. And he does say about the Americans when he says they have this philosophy of enlightened self-interest. The Americans will say, oh, I'm serving on the town council, or I'm serving on the school board, or I'm helping as the, local road commissioner or justice of the peace. Or whatever. I'm doing that because it's really in my interest. It's going to be better for me and my family. He says the Americans say that about themselves, sort of justify their civic participation, but he says they don't really mean it. They still have a larger emotional commitment to America and to their from the local level up to the national level. And they do things just because it's the right thing to do. They serve. He says they're magnanimous and disinterested, right? They do it because it's the right thing to do to serve.
Mhm.
And he says they don't really give credit to themselves. But he also warns that if they focus too much on that self-interested part, that will go in a narrow individualistic direction. So he does talk about the need for the religious foundations, the moral dimension of reflective patriotism to be regenerated. He worries that in the era, all these things that Robert Putnam writes about, not just the Bowling Alone book, this famous Harvard political scientist, not just the Bowling Alone book in a decline of civil society, civil associations, but the sequel book with David Campbell called American Grace about religion in America. Putnam and Campbell. All these things that Tocqueville can see actually do come true in America. The warning that if we don't have the right sort of religious and common moral foundation, with a spirit of religious liberty. It's not like the guy, he's all a big fan. Tocqueville's a big fan of the First Amendment, religious liberty, religious pluralism. No government, state, or federal should tell you what to believe. But that religious belief generally is a good thing for Americans. If we don't keep that alive, we won't be able to keep alive this balanced, complicated, reflective patriotism, because it's partly a belief and a hope in America, and ultimately says, right, this idea of equal natural rights, that's really a Christian religious, moral, metaphysical principle. Why shouldn't the weak just be conquered by the strong, right? Why shouldn't the more wealthy just conquer the right? It's a religious, higher metaphysical, moral principle to that. So Tocqueville does write in the second volume of Democracy in America how, leaders in politics and leaders in culture and education and society should talk about these moral principles and the sort of religious dimensions of these moral principles without imposing a religion or a doctrine. They should model these and talk about them to keep alive and sustain in America this sense of a common moral community, a hope and a belief in America, ideas of service and commitment, even when it's against your self-interest. You do it because it's the right thing to do. All of those, Tocqueville thinks, come from a metaphysical, religious, moral foundation. And we need to keep that alive, to keep alive the right balance of reflective patriotism, to keep alive civic participation and engagement. I mean, look at where we are today in 2026. Young people do not register to vote. We lowered the voting age in the 20th century to 18 years of age. But young people 18 to 25, 18 to 30 do not register to vote at the same rate that older people do. And they don't actually get out and vote, even if they are registered at the same rate. Young people say, in answer to, serious public opinion polls are not perfect, but serious polls by very reputable firms, Gallup and Pew and others, right? Young people will say, I'm not very patriotic about America. It's not really that important to live in a democracy or, self-government. And boy, if young people are saying that at the rate it's been happening for decades now, where is all of America headed? Tocqueville could see that in the 1830s, that general kind of problem. I may have mentioned this before, the polls that came out from 2022 onward, after Vladimir Putin's Russia invades Ukraine, right? So American pollsters generally asking questions about that war, about foreign policy, and then they sneak in the question, and what would you do if America was invaded? Would you fight? Stay and fight the way the Ukrainians have fought? And in 2022 and 2023 and 2024, when this gets asked to Americans, like a bare majority of Americans would say, yes, I'll stay and fight. It's not a very positive, heartwarming poll to read. But a majority of Americans say, yes, I would stay and fight. But under 35 or under 30, a majority says, no, I would not stay and fight for America if America was invaded. So the state, now, sure, you could say, oh, it's just easy to answer a poll. Who cares? Doesn't cost me anything. But there's a kind of privacy about a poll. You're anonymous, where you can speak the truth. And if so repeatedly, these reputable polling firms are registering that young Americans do not care about America, why bother? What is the long-term trajectory for our civic health? So to get back to what I talked about at the beginning, this is why in the Educating for American Democracy report, we talked about Tocqueville's reflective patriotism. It's an element of a civic education to motivate you to care to be educated, but also to care about America in common, beyond my party, my policy views, my private self-interest. America is a good thing, even if it's not a perfect thing. It's a good thing, even if we're going to argue about it, which is a very American thing to do, to argue about America. Tocqueville can see that. So that's why reflective patriotism matters, and actually why we ought to be doing what we're doing here. We ought to be teaching about it and talking about it and looking to Tocqueville as a resource in the difficult situation we've gotten ourselves into.
I think this is episode 6 of Alexis de Tocqueville, and I have just learned so much about him. And I really do appreciate this reflective patriotism, because I do think it's a truly American thing, right? Americans like to fight over things, and we all want this more perfect country. And we all have different ways where we think that can happen. But, I'm glad that you brought up one of the ways that we're doing it here at ASU, at Stedel, and at the Center for American Civics is by making sure people understand all of these things. So Dr. Carrese, thank you. Listeners, Dr. Carrese did mention the Educating for American Democracy. I'm going to put that report in the show notes. If you're interested in it, definitely take a look. It is a bipartisan thing. It is not one side or the other. There are incredible names on this list who've done lots of research, lots of talking. So definitely check it out.
Great. Thank you, Liz, for all your good work.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of Civics in a Year. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with someone who cares about a constitutional republic as much as you do. For more episodes, resources, and updates, follow us on social media or visit us at civics.asu.edu. Make sure to check out the show notes for any relevant links. Special thanks to the United States Marine Band for their performance of the Stars and Stripes Forever. Let's keep building a stronger constitutional republic, one episode at a time.